everyone. Thank you for joining us for one more of our series of conversations with Mexican professionals in New England, with the aim of transmitting and showcasing to the broad audience the many contributions of Mexicans to art, culture, science, and education in this region. This afternoon, we have two splendid guests that will be talking about composing and producing music during the pandemic. We have Marisa Canales, flutist and musical producer, and Aristides Llaneza, a composer. Thank you so much, Marisa and Aristides, for giving us the time and for wanting to share your stories with us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yes, thank you for inviting us.
Marisa was born in Mexico City, where she started her musical studies, and she holds a bachelor's degree from the Philadelphia College of Performing Arts and is a graduate from the National Conservatory of Versailles, France. Marisa is the founder of the record label Urtex Digital Classics. The company's catalog includes nearly 300 titles and is distributed worldwide. She has been nominated to the Latin Grammy for some of her productions. As a soloist, Marisa has performed with important orchestras such as the National Symphony Orchestra of Mexico, the Mining Symphony Orchestra, the Mexico City Philharmonic, the Jalapa and Michoacan Symphony Orchestras, the Paris Sinfonietta, and the London Symphony Orchestra. She currently divides her time and professional activity between Boston and Mexico City. Aristides Llaneza Sandoval is a Mexican-Spanish composer currently based in Boston. He has a PhD in composition from Duke University. He has participated as the music curator for the Chihuahua Arts Festival, and he has been a professor at the art department of the Chihuahua State University and Chihuahua City's Conservatory. Aristides has received awards from the Mexican Secretary of Public Education and the State of Nuevo León Council for the Arts, among others. His music has been performed and commissioned by leading ensembles in Europe and North America. So thanks both of you again for being with us. And I shared with you previously the questions, but now I thought of another one that I had not written, and that's the one I'm going to begin with. You both are in Boston because of love, because you decided to come following your spouses. Was deciding to come a difficult decision, and what were your biggest challenges? Marisa.
It was not a difficult decision because I like my husband very much. Not only do I love him, I still like him a lot. So it was not difficult to decide to come, but it was complicated logistics-wise because, as you mentioned, I founded 25 years ago. I founded a label, one of the leading, if not the leading, classical label in Mexico and most of Latin America. And we have more than almost close to 450 titles right now. I think that the bio that you read is a little bit outdated. So in order to coordinate all the work of the musical production and distribution and everything, I had to keep my office in Mexico. So it turns out that I travel to Mexico very often. Not now because of the pandemic, but I usually go to Mexico for 2 weeks every 6 weeks. So logistically, it's kind of complicated. The decision was a ready-made one.
Thank you, Marisa. And what about you, Aristides?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. Yes, I think for me it was a somewhat difficult decision, but at the same time, it was a decision that I made really to come to Boston, but even to come and stay in the US, because ultimately at the time that I decided to come to Boston, I wasn't, I could have returned, let's say, to Mexico. It was not part of my plans to immigrate to the US at that point, you know. But then, but you know, I decided to come here partly also because, of course, you know, my wife, you know, that at the moment, you know, that I met her, well, I thought, you know, I just need to go with her. But I also have children in the US, you know, so that kind of made me kind of change my life and come to this area. And then, so that's, I mean, that would have been the difficulty. Now that since I came here, I guess Boston, it wouldn't have been my natural place for me to come, because I think I'm more like a person of the desert in the West, and I do like the very open landscapes. The more that I grow up, I realize that I like those landscapes the most, you know, and I like to see the mountains far away and things like that, you know. So like in the beginning, it was a little bit difficult to come to this area, but now that I've been living here for a few years and I explore it more, I like it a lot, you know. And I you know, found many places that are natural places, especially, that are really beautiful in this area. So yeah, I'm pretty happy.
Thank you, Aristides. Marisa, tell us more about your experience as a musical producer. Tell us a little bit more about your label, which is turning 25 years old. And tell us what are the elements you consider central to your catalog. Have these elements or criteria have been changing along the years?
Well, I cannot believe it's 25 years old already. I cannot. Of course.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Silver wedding.
Yeah.
It is. It has been quite an adventure, because 25 years represent a period of time in the music industry where the most important upheavals have happened. I mean, the change from physical supports like CDs or cassettes into the digital files, and the Napster revolution happened when everybody started exchanging digital files for free, and a whole generation grew up believing that there was no need to pay for music. And then all the regulations regarding piracy and free exchange of files came, and now there is only streaming. So the death of the physical support also happened. So we have really gone through a lot of problems, a lot of upheavals, and it's quite surprising to me that we're still alive. But here we are, not only alive, but kicking, which is good. So the central idea of the creation of Urtext was to provide Mexican composers and performers with a platform for the distribution of our music worldwide. We created the label, Benjamin and I, 25 years ago, because we detected the need for a label that would have the same kind of characteristics as the best independent labels, both of Europe and of United States. And we really took it upon ourselves to be able to be distributed worldwide within the 5 first years of the label's existence. And we actually succeeded in the 2nd year. So it was quite an adventure. I think we were very courageous or very fool, and it worked. So it was good. All is good. So the central part of our catalog has to do with Latin American composers, Mexican and Latin American composers, Latin American music, mostly Mexican, and Mexican performers as well. Throughout the years, we have been approached by international artists to whom we have opened our doors gladly, because we have been approached by the likes of La Petite Bande, with Sigiswald Keuken, with people like Cyprian Katsaris, the Cypriot, the pianist from Cyprus, French Cyprus pianist, a trio of flutists from France, the Trio d'Argent, an American soprano of Peruvian origin, Jessica Rivera. So we have slightly changed our repertoire to include works from the let's say the canon repertoire, but our focus remains the same, and it's the nucleus of our catalog is music from our composers of our time and our region.
Great. Marisa, thank you. Aristides, for you as a composer, how would you describe your style and how has it evolved? And what do you believe is or are the most important elements of your work for a producer to be interested in producing it? What needs to stand out? How would you sell Marisa your?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think, well, the first thing, the most obvious, I'm a classical, the way I say it is like, I'm a classically trained contemporary music composer, like somebody that is writing music that is in the, let's say, Western tradition of classical music, that in some ways continuing that tradition. At the same time, now, as you all know, well, in classical music, there was like a big rupture that came in the beginning of last century, right? So like classical music became very different. Western classical music changed a lot, in the turn of the century. Not for every composer necessarily, but there were many changes. So let's say my music, in the one hand, has like a technical aspect that is informed by, let's say, the practices of contemporary music. And that is about, and when I'm talking about contemporary music, I talk about music from all 20th century and current music. And so part of my music is, let's say, a technical exploration of those ideas. Let's say my own personal exploration of those ideas. And the other part, which I think every time as I get older or less young, is that the other part, which is the emotional part, which I mean it's always been there, right? But I think it's becoming more important. What I see as, like, let's say, the cultural, emotional part. And so I think that's where my music is, I mean, I hope that's where my music becomes very personal. That is the confluence of like this technique that is like a more refined kind of contemporary music technique with aspects of my personality and my, that really, I think, for me to explain them, I mean, I have to go back a little bit into my background of like even how I learned music, just to be brief, my let's say I started music. I'm from Mexico. Was born in Mexico City, but grew up in the northern Mexico, in the city of Chihuahua, which at the time that I grew up, it was a great city to grow up, but it was like a provincial city. So actually, my first music studies were in electric guitar. I play a lot of rock music, so that's probably my first influence, and I became quite proficient at playing in rock bands, when I was in high school. And then I also started studying classical music. Then I went to conservatory, and so those are maybe my main two influences when I was young. Classical rock, classical music, and by classical music I mean the tradition of classical music. I was lucky that I had professors in New York that were very well trained in kind of this conservatory European tradition of classical music, and I studied with them, and then I did, of course, my other studies, my PhD, and the other element perhaps is like folk music from Mexico, that was actually in the same way that rock was perhaps the first music that I performed. Folk music from Mexico was perhaps the first music that I listened to, because my parents were both amateur musicians, and there was a lot of music making in my house, like weekly, from at a pretty good level, from my parents performing with their friends to once in a while, like even a professional player will show up, like people of the the statue of like Oscar Chavez, or people like that suddenly, they drop for a party with my parents, Anyway, so having said all that, yeah, I think that maybe what is interesting, about my music. And then there's another element together with all that now is becoming even more apparent, which is this idea of what I see as kind of a composer that has like a very strong, let's say, immigrant experience, you know, because ultimately most of my life, I realize now that most of my life I live different places where I am from, you know, from my move from Mexico City to Chihuahua, to all these years that I spent in the US. I also live in Europe, but always, so that has given me a very particular point of view. I think that I'm able to see certain traditions and be part of the tradition, but also be like some sort of a spectator. So I think because of that, in all these influences that I was quoting, I feel that I'm always able to take, let's say, do it in my way, you know, because I have never felt the burden of tradition that some composers feel. You know, for me, it's like I feel like I can learn from different things and take that and make it personal. And that, for me, that's it's a very simple process, you know. But now I realize that perhaps it's a unique process.
Thank you, Aristides.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Now, for both of you, how has the pandemic influenced in any way the way you produce, Marisa, the way you compose, Aristides? Has it made you consider producing or playing in different ways?
Before answering that, let me say something. You sold me your music. You sold it very well. So you're a very good salesperson, and I would like to hear your music. Seriously.
Okay.
Okay, so the pandemic has brought on a huge amount of problems for producing. We have not been able to record with musicians together, live performing, and I haven't yet gone into producing long distance. So what has happened is that all the recordings that we had already made, but that we hadn't yet edited nor mastered, nor are in the process of being completed at the moment. So all the backlog of productions is coming out into the light, which is good because sometimes we have through a spurt of a lot of recordings, and then you have to process all that and it takes a while. So a lot of that music is now going to be ready for the fall, which starts very soon. And we're going to have a lot of fantastic new productions that were recorded pre-pandemic. So in that respect, producing music has been quite difficult for new recordings, but luckily for us, we had a lot of material to process. On the other hand, I haven't been able to perform, of course, live, but I have been doing quite a bit of performance online with friends and with colleagues. And I have also been producing a lot of content related to the music. And I'm sure we will talk about that a bit later. But I have been having the luxury of having a lot of time to practice, which is good. That doesn't happen very often. So my fingers are quite dexterous at the moment. It's a shame I can't play in public because I could actually make use of that. But well, that's where I am.
And what have you thought about all these? A week ago, there was the Impossible Orchestra playing a danzón that you must have seen. And so I've seen many new productions of musicians in Zoom doing music. That must be a total, I don't think it will stay for a long time, but for the moment, I suppose it must be a very, very incredible challenge to kind of make the
that Impossible Orchestra, for instance, it's really an impossible orchestra. It's an incredible endeavor that they were able to put together such an amount of brilliant stars playing together the danzón. I mean, Alondra and GNP, who is the company that financed the whole thing, or one of them, really did a fantastic job putting it together. But I think that we crave human companionship, and we crave communality, and we crave collaboration live. And of course it's fantastic, and of course it's a challenge, and we all have risen to the challenge, some of us better than some others, or some of us worse than others. I should put it that way, to be, you know, to be humble. But I don't think that will last too long. I think that will stay forever in the activities of musicians, of performers, but I don't think that will be the preferred way to perform music in the coming months when this is finally over. So that's what I think. I don't know what you think, Aristides.
Yeah, very similar. I mean, personally, I feel very grateful that my, let's say, day-to-day life hasn't been affected, except for the positive, and I relate to what you're saying, that I have more time to practice, you know, that I don't commute, you know, so in that way it has been good. Now, I know it's been very hard, especially for performers. So kind of what I'm hoping is that that this historical moment that we're living will make society at large reevaluate the importance of, for example, live performance, you know. Because as you know, like some institutions, you know, especially in the field of classical music, they were really suffering. I mean, classical music has been diminishing in the past, you know, I don't know, few decades, right? The public has been diminishing, you know. So I really hope that people will really want to go and see the orchestra, see the ensemble, see musicians. I mean, have contact with their friends. I mean, have all these kind of social interactions, you know. At the same time, I'm also hoping that, like, maybe now that there has been some sort of acceleration of using digital platforms, like now, like the conversation that we're having of that, and that those that are of the highest quality will, let's say, stay. Because I think that's going to be a trend too, that, you know, there's going to be more education online, things like that, and that we're probably going to take the best of that and continue it for the good of communication, let's say. Yeah.
Completely agree with you. The best will stay, of course, and it has to, because it has enriched the experience of the audiences, and also of the performances of the performers.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Aristides, what would you say are the challenges of composing a musical work for a specific artist or a specific instrument? And Marisa, in your role as a flutist, you have had music composed specifically for you from Eugenio Toussaint, that we both miss, a good friend, Samuel Sim, Arturo Marquez, among others. How do you make these works your own in order to perform them and convey what the composer meant to say with them?
Both. Aristides, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. For me, the challenge is like well, I feel, you know, that when I'm approaching, I'm going to write a piece, let's say, for a string quartet, that there are two elements that are very important. One is, let's say, the tradition of the string quartet as a genre, you know, all the repertoire that has been written for that instrumentation, that group, you know, and also, especially nowadays, the tradition of the ensemble that is going to perform the piece. And here I'm thinking, if you're writing the piece for a particular group, right? So, because ultimately every group nowadays, I mean, they have a particular way, a particular style of performing. You can see the type of music that they like to play. You can, so those are like two tensions that you need to understand, and then, sorry, there are two elements that you need to understand, and then they create a tension with your own personality, because at the same time, you know, you want to write your own music for these groups, right? So sometimes, I mean, the part of the challenge, I think, if one is very practical, pragmatic, might even be choosing the right ensemble. That's something that I learned with some years. You know, if you, for example, for whatever reason, you don't choose the right ensemble, to begin with, then the process becomes much more difficult because you might have
the right ensemble for you.
For you, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You know, and then because then if you are lucky enough that, or you're in a situation that you could choose an ensemble that is right for your music, you know, then the tension is going to be less. And in fact, it's going to be a great opportunity for you to do the things that you wanted to do. So for me, I mean, I've been in those situations. I also been in the situations where I work with, yes, great musicians that maybe didn't share all the ideas that I had. And, you know, in those cases, I mean, usually works out well, but it's more difficult. So I think, yeah, so I think that's the challenge, the ensemble and the repertoire.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I have had all sorts of experiences because I have been lucky enough that I have been able to do the world premiere of maybe close to 100 works.
Wow.
And I have commissioned about 50 works. Of those, at least 15 are concertos for flute and orchestra, and the rest are chamber music. And some composers you immediately identify with, and that's what happened with me and Samuel Seaman, for instance. He has written 2 sonatas for flute and piano, 1 trio for flute, cello, and piano, 2 concertos for flute and orchestra, 1 for small orchestra, and the other one for the Mineria Orchestra that you mentioned, which is a huge orchestra. And so throughout the years, we have collaborated creating all this repertoire for the flute that now has become a part of the standard repertoire of the instrument. And his 2 sonatas are mandatory works in many conservatories around the world, which is a great satisfaction, you know, because you have contributed somehow to better the instrument, to enrich the repertoire, to enrich the technical abilities of the students who work on it. But I have had the complete opposite experience of being invited to do the premiere of a work by a composer who has never in his life or her life taken a woodwind instrument in his hands and doesn't allow any time for breaths, you know? So when you start turning blue, you stop and breathe and you continue as much as you can, you know? That kind of thing also happens. So the less young I become, to quote you, the less young I become, the more I know what kind of music will be best for me. But I am also very curious always, and I like to explore new music. So I have worked with many fantastic composers. You know, Armando Luna wrote for me, Gaby Ortiz has written for me, Arturo Marquez has written for me, Alexis Aranda, Lalo Schifrin wrote a concerto for me. So, you know, and with those names, I have given you such a huge different fan of styles, you know, panorama of styles, that you can tell that I have worked with a lot of different styles. So the first thing is that as a performer, you have to learn to be very patient, because composers like to keep composing. Even if it's 2 days before the premiere, they want to keep changing things. And I just, in the days when I did the first performance of Samuel Seaman's first concerto, it was still the days of the fax. And so he was sending me changes through the fax. So I turned off my fax machine. And he kept calling me, please turn on your fax machine. No, bye-bye. You know, that kind of thing.
Well, that's the way that you also make a composition yours.
Exactly. So it has been wonderful. My life pushed me into that. It's not a decision that I made consciously when I came out of school and I said, oh, I'm going to create all this repertoire in collaboration with composers. Not at all. I came back from my graduate studies in France. I came back to Mexico, and Manuel Enriquez took me under his wing, and he invited me to perform a lot in the Foro de Música Nueva. And that's how I discovered working with composers, and it really fascinated me, and it just continued to this day.
Fantastic. Aristides, do you want to add anything? Any comment to Marisa's?
Well, I think it's very interesting to hear, her anecdote, and because it's true that sometimes, I mean, it's great when like a performer gets together with a composer, where you're describing it, like how you create works. I mean, there seems to be certain types of work in the repertoire, right, that almost needed that collaboration, that are like almost inconceivable without that collaboration. So yeah, I just think that's that's really valuable. That's great. Yeah.
Marisa, you are very active, as we can see, always. And that has not changed with COVID-19. You have a Facebook initiative called Tuesdays with Marisa, and you were telling us that tonight you will have one of the second chapter of the second edition of Tuesdays with Marisa. And you also launched a successful fundraising campaign to support musicians. Tell us a little bit more about these projects.
So Tuesdays with Marisa started as a way to promote the music in the catalog. We realized that we were not doing enough in the social networks. And so we decided to create content specific to the catalog. But at the same time that this idea was being hatched, the pandemic came. And so I decided to do these sort of reflections around the music of a specific composer or CD or performer, to focus my attention on one particular title or a set of titles that have a relationship amongst them, but always related to something that would be relevant to this time. So for instance, talking about how do you get over a crisis through collaboration. And when talking about the recording of an orchestral piece, a new orchestral piece by Paul Desen, for instance, it required a lot of collaboration between the composer and the conductor and the musicians and the producer, whom it was me who produced that recording. So I talked about collaboration, but I also talked about, for instance, one title is called Lost Landscapes, and I talked about how the decaying ecology of the planet brought this pandemic onto us. And it relates to the fact that we are losing landscapes, not only natural landscapes, but also human landscapes. We lost the human interaction, and that's a landscape that was lost to us. So that was the idea of creating this series of Tuesdays with Marisa. And we did 12 episodes of the first season. So I took a break for 1 month, and now we started a second season, and the second season is all with guests, where I invite one guest and I ask him or her to talk about what is the way, how his or her life passed, and what did he do or she do to become the person that they are since they were students at the conservatory. So it's the whole idea of going through their whole historic endeavors. So that's
related to music, obviously.
Of course, yes. All my guests are musical guests. And regarding
where can the public see those programs? Are they public?
Oh yes. They are always in our page, the labels page in Facebook, which is called Urtext Online. Okay. Urtext is for musicians. It's an easy word because we know it, but for the general public, urtext is a musical term that means original text, and that's what we want to reflect with the name of our label, that we go to the source and we work with composers and we do the best we can to be as faithful as possible to the original intention of the composer. And regarding the fundraising campaign, I am very, very happy and very proud to tell you that it was incredibly successful. We launched it in order to help those performers who, from one day to the other, lost all means of supporting themselves. So all the people who play live in restaurants or in theaters or in schools or in whatever, they lost from one day to the next every possibility to do their musical work to sustain themselves. So we launched this campaign, it was called Juntos por la Música, Together for Music. And our original goal was 100,000 pesos, and we ended up raising 220,000 pesos. And now we are about to launch a second part of that campaign, but in another format that I will let you know when it comes out.
We'll be happy to contribute and to promote it. Yes.
Thank you, thank you.
Aristides, you mentioned that you used to play electric guitar. Are there other instruments that you have performed?
Well,
how would you describe the gap that appears to exist between composition and performance?
Yes, that's definitely, there is, I mean, nowadays, I think there's somewhat of a gap. It's true, it's very true. For me, I did learn, let's say, music by performing. As I mentioned, yes, I played electric guitar, and then, but then I also studied classical guitar. And in fact, in university, I was a classical guitar major in New York. So that's really what I did, you know. I have to admit that it was never fully my passion to play in front of people. So I think I like to play in my room. And that sounds very strange. You see, that sounds very strange if you want to be a professional musician, right? But yes, I think it's true. You know, I mean, I like to perform, and I like to even play chamber music. But I was always thinking, it's like, oh, I want to get this experience so then I can compose. You see, I wanted to feel the experience of playing chamber music, but to go and compose chamber music. So now, in general, I think the gap might be a problem sometimes, because it's true that, you know, the performers might find like compositions where, as Marisa was saying, like there's no space to breathe. There are very strange things happening in music that are not what a performer will do. You know, so that's an issue for composers to correct. You know, at the same time, you know, for me personally, I just didn't like the act of performing. I did like performing rock music. I think because classical music is very serious too, you know, and is highly technically, is very demanding technically. You know, ironically, the music that I write is actually quite challenging. So I can write it, but I wouldn't. I wouldn't like to perform it myself, you know, because it will make me very nervous, you know, to go on stage and perform that type of music, you know. So that's.
And where can we hear your music, Aristides?
I think the easiest would be in the Bandcamp. You can search. Not Bandcamp. Sorry, it's forgot the SoundCloud. I have many of my pieces are in SoundCloud. If you look my name, you can find it there easily. Okay.
And Marisa, have you ever tried to compose? Or have you helped a composer compose for you? Like saying, hey, this is too high, too low, or?
Well, there is a difference between composing and coaching the composer as far as the capacities of the instrument. It's completely different. I have never contributed with an idea, with a musical idea. I have complained a lot about what he or she is writing, and they tell me, no, you have to rise to the challenge. You have to rise to the challenge. And sometimes it's impossible. Sometimes you just can't do it. But sometimes if you apply yourself and it's worth it, of course you can do it. And in the end, it turns out to be fantastic. And that has been the experience with a lot of music that at the beginning looks like impossible on the page, and little by little you start assimilating and you start feeling it and you start learning how to adapt to that. And I remember one instance in which I was working with Eugenio Toussaint. We were going to premiere his flute concerto, and his music used to be, he used to write the music that was very complex rhythmically, and the third movement of the concerto was just impossible for me. And he told me, just come to my house. And so I went there, and we went into his studio, and he sat at the piano and he started playing, and it looked so easy because he was playing in the piano, he was playing the whole thing, the flute and everything, you know, all the orchestra and the flute. And I was like, oh, shut up. And he was, no, just listen, this is very simple. And he started moving and said, just dance with me. And I started dancing, and he said, now take your flute and dance. And I understood it completely because he just switched the frame of mind that I had, because I was counting and trying to be really, you know, very, how to say that, very
rigorous,
precise, you know, and very rigorous, yes. And he told me, just relax and dance with it, and understand that this has to do with a feeling and with a frame of mind. And that was such a lesson that I learned with him that day, because I came out understanding perfectly what he meant from the very first day. And 2 hours before that, I had no idea how to perform it. And I was crying because the premiere was just a week away, you know. It's great.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic story. Thanks for sharing. And it tells you, Aristides, that like classic music doesn't need to be necessary to uptight. I love seeing groups that enjoy playing, and it's so nice when they are able to share with their public the joy they are experiencing by playing the music that they are playing. And that's something that I really, really miss of this pandemic times, not being able to go to a concert. To close up, tell us, both of you, are you positive, optimistic? When do you think we will come back to what we were used to in terms of performing arts?
I think we will. I mean, hopefully we get like more knowledge, you know, like what we were saying before from this. I mean, I think this thing that is happening, it's like, so, you know, you analyze it. The more you analyze it, the worse it looks, really, you know. And then in the economy, in every aspect of life, it's just like such a, you know, very difficult time, right? But I think, I mean, there should be good positive things about it. I think that the idea that this is like that people have to be separate is from each other, you know, and it's a very powerful thing that probably has not happened in the lifetime of really anybody alive right now, right? So like, I think once let's say if there is a vaccine and we don't experience that anymore, then there should be, I mean, I hope, I'm trying to be optimistic here, and I hope that there will be some sort of renaissance of many activities, you know, from, you know, going to restaurants, to going out, to like music, to any other things like that, you know. And so that's what. But I think it might take us still a little while. So you know, we might have to just hold on and see what positive things we can do now with the situation as it is. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Aristides. Marisa, how?
I think that, first of all, I think we have to learn to live with this, not because this particular pandemic will not go away. I think it will go away sooner than we had thought, because apparently they are making huge strides with the vaccine. So I think it will be a matter of a few months before we can have a vaccine, maybe at the beginning of next year. But I think that pandemics are going to become more and more common in this world of ours. So I think that we have to learn how to function in this way. And in order to learn how to live with it is also to learn how to prevent it. So if we get something positive from this pandemic is the fact that we are learning what to do and what not to do. So there are a lot of experiments being done at the moment by separating musicians from each other to play together. And they say that, 3 meters away for strings and 5 meters for woodwinds, and I don't know, maybe a kilometer for a singer. I have no idea. But the truth of the matter is that's very, very artificial. You make music together and you need to listen to each other and you need to feel the breath of the other, not literally, but you need to breathe together in order to make music together. And that's figuratively and literally speaking. So I am optimistic in that we are learning how to act. I am optimistic in that I think that we will come up with a vaccine very soon. I am pessimistic in that I see a lot of people who are not convinced about the science of how to behave, and that represents a danger for all of us. So, but still my life continues to be music, and if I don't have that, I will not live. So I want to live.
Yeah. And let's continue doing and performing music. Yes.
Yes.
Well,
If I can add something else quickly. Like, yes, I think when Marisa was saying that there's going to be other pandemics, I agree, or there could be, right? I think something to learn maybe from this pandemic in music that relates to music is that I think we need to have more safety systems for musicians, because down the line, I mean, things like that might happen, and I think it's just, and probably for other types of employment too, that people might need to have like just a safety net. If this happens again, let's say there's another pandemic or the beginning of a pandemic, people need to know that they can go home and that they are protected, and I think in music in particular, it's just gonna, I mean, if this thing happen every few years, I mean, it will be very detrimental to music. So I think for now, maybe now is time. I mean, once we finish this, might be a time for everybody to think is like, what could we do in the future to prevent the impact,
Exactly, that's what I mean. I think that there are devices that can be implemented, separations that can be implemented that are, I cannot be specific about it, but there are a lot of experiments that are being done right now. And maybe some of them will be very fruitful, and we will be able to resume the activities that we so love.
And even some kind of insurance, maybe.
Insurance, yeah.
That could give you some survival kits as musicians when you are not able to perform.
Yes, yes. That's the part where you are not able to perform, where you can't perform and you cannot make a living out of your job. And what is your job? What is your life? What is your livelihood? I think it's such a tragedy.
It is. But let's hope that as you both say, it's not that far away, the end of this time, and that, but also all the important things that have come, the new experiences, like having conversations like this, that 6 months ago we would have not been having, most likely.
It's true, completely true.
So thank you, Marisa, Aristides, for your time. And it is very important for us to show how you are producing, you are composing during these times in New England, and for us to show how Mexicans like you are contributing to the artistic life of Boston, but also of Mexico. So thank you so much for what you do, and thank you for this time.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Great to see you.
Thank you, Alberto.